Welcome in, everyone. You are listening to the Boston the Gloss. Carla, welcome in on what a busy NFL day.
My head's on a swivel.
Woo!
I cannot keep up with it all.
It
But
has
it's
been
awesome
amazing
sauce.
to see all the activity, all the movement across the league. And, I was saying a few minutes ago that I just didn't think this free agent pool was that attractive. There were some big names. I mean, I loved Chris Godwin as a wide receiver, but he was coming off an injury. Nearly every one of
And a
the
major injury.
free agents, even as Stephon Diggs, he had an injury. There were lots of guys available, but who had a hiccup. But nevertheless, a lot of money was spent on players today, ton of money, and the Texans were in the midst of a big, busy day in the NFL. The biggest headline with the Texans, Laramie Tunsil being traded to the Washington Commanders.
Let me walk back just a second. Today's the first day, official day of free agency. What in the world is free with this agency? We got Josh Allen signing for a record $330 million. We have Myles Garrett, the highest paid non-quarterback in the league, for $40 million a year. There is no free in free agency.
You're in the wrong line of business, Carla.
Seriously. I mean, all I need is an extra 5 pounds, and you put me on the O-line for the Texans. They just might need it.
Well, there's an opening or two
or
three on that offensive line.
Good gosh. Okay. David, here's what I think. So we've got Tony Pauline coming up, expert NFL analyst in the next segment. I really want his take on this, because while I am not going to miss Laramie's penalty on 78, I'm over it. I know he didn't show up to practice regularly. He was not picking up CJ on the field when he was, got knocked down, this kind of thing. What's your plan? Like, that is the one area. Yes, they've done a great job filling in a number 2 with Christian Kirk, Braxton Berrios, in the wide receiver room. But good gosh, if you cannot protect CJ, I don't care about anything else. You can get the best offensive coordinator in the business. You can do all this. I have got to believe in D'Amico. I trust. I'm not sure I trust in Nick, but I trust in D'Amico, and I've got to believe there's a plan. So I want to talk to Tony Pauline and get his thought on this, but I am a little bit flummoxed because we didn't really get a whole lot in return for Laramie Tunsil either. We did get rid of his 2 years, $75 million. Well, it was a 3 year, $75 million remaining on his contract. So we did, save
up some cap space.
We did open up some cap space.
Tony Pauline will be up with this next segment, and we can ask him what lurks out there in the draft, where the Texans could find more offensive linemen. But as it sits right now, of course, Shaq Mason was cut. Laramie Tunsil has now been traded to the Commanders. And look, I think the position of most Texans fans is good riddance. There was a whole lot of frustration about both those players.
Yeah.
There's frustration about Kenyon Green.
Yep.
There's frustration about Titus Howard. But where do you look at that offensive line and feel really, really, really good?
You don't. That's kind of it. And I don't love what we got. We got a 2025 third round pick, a 7th round pick, and then next year a 2nd and a 4th. What?
Well, it's those draft picks and the trades always have to be considered in light of the salary issues.
Yeah.
Texans did open up some cap room, and they have some money now, some real currency to go and spend. But I don't see a lot of big name free agents out there who can shore up the offensive line right now. Feels like the Bears highlighted or got them all. They got them all in.
On both lines, offensive
on both
and
lines.
defense.
Bears really beefing up their interior, and they're doing what they can to support their rookie quarterback, Caleb Williams, whom they really believe has a high ceiling, but he was running for his life last year. Now he'll have some protection with the resources they've gotten. Here comes C.J. Stroud, another young quarterback. He was running for his life last year too.
Yep.
And now they've got several big holes to fill on the offensive line.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, even though I'm not going to miss Laramie Tunsil, because the amount of Sundays I sat in my living room screaming at back-to-back penalties from him, he was the best player on a weak sauce O-line for Houston. So, Nick, if you're listening, I'm going to trust that you've got a plan. You got to show up with something here. I mean, I don't know what, but last week we did highlight a number of great O-line players that are coming out in the draft. I mean, seemingly. I mean, you're drafting potential. We don't really know at this next level. Yes, and we certainly don't want to, in Houston, a line full of rookies. But my gosh, this is crazy. But I
People
don't
did
know.
not see
I'm
this
kind of
one coming.
flummoxed.
It was not one
No,
of those long rumored
no.
trade deals. But it is interesting. You talk about where we were last week. We were talking about the Texans going into the draft and feeling like with their first round pick and their second round picks, the early draft capital, they would probably focus on wide receiver and offensive line.
I think wide receiver were pretty set.
And now they've made the moves where wide receiver, they don't need to be aggressive with the draft. If there's somebody very compelling, they may take him. But they have seemingly satisfied that need, the wide receiver position, but they've created more of a hole with the offensive line than they had a week ago. And so it just looks to me, at least, that they're going to really have to double down on the offensive line position going into the draft. Of course, you never want to go into a draft trying to reach for particular positions. You'd love to take the best player available. But the reality is, you often do fill needs in the draft. You often have a real eye for what you have to get from a positional standpoint. And the Texans do appear, unless there's some new revelation between now and the NFL draft, it does appear they're going to have to do some carpet bombing, some saturation picks, several offensive linemen coming in the first round. In the second, they're going to have to start picking some picks to shore up that offensive line out of the draft.
Well, hopefully, this is what I think we should do for our stomachs and our hearts that are like, eek, what's happening here? Is think about the draft where the Texans traded up to get CJ Stroud. And then in the next pick, we traded up to get Will Anderson. And those were two franchise changing. Remember, they won offensive player, rookie of the year, defensive rookie of the year, and have been absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to hang my hat on the fact that that was savvy. That was gutsy. That was franchise changing. It took the Texans from worst to first in a year. It was incredible. And D'Amico being at the helm of all of this. So I'm going to try and hang my hat on, you know what? They've got a plan. I'm going to give them the benefit of that doubt because in the last 2 years they have not failed us, and including the bold move of firing Bobby Slowick. Like we noted all season. This is no surprise for anyone who listens to the show that we have been disappointed in Bobby Slowick's play calling, his lack of creativity, adjustments at halftime, this and that. And you know what? He was gone after 2 years. So I love that. It's like, why when we are in a win now situation with a young quarterback that is affordable, you've got to do what you can. So I appreciate that they didn't hang on to that. They've made smart moves, I guess is what my overall summary is. They've made really smart moves in the last 2 years. Let's hope that they've got a plan for this one.
Okay, let's look at some smart moves at the wide receiver position, because it does appear they shored up that position. They got two guys, Christian Kirk, Braxton Berrios. Let's first talk about Christian Kirk because he came in the door first. He came from Jacksonville. He's a guy you followed before.
Yep.
It was a trade that only required a sixth-round pick, although it did require some salary cap capital. What do you think Christian Kirk brings to this team?
I really like the Christian Kirk move because, Jaguars were going to release him. And then the Texans swooped up to get him, which for a division rival, that was pretty crazy of Jacksonville. But not surprising with Jacksonville.
Well, but they get a sixth rounder as opposed to getting nothing from cutting him. So
no, exactly.
Even a sixth rounder from
but it goes to
like
your division rival. That's the only thing. But they freed up over $10 million in cap space, so it all worked out great with them. But the Texans really do need insurance behind Nico Collins. That is clear, and we cannot count on Tank Dell being ready to go because that knee injury was extensive. But I think that the only thing that holds me back with Christian Kirk, it's not his ability as far as skill. It's his injuries that are a concern. But he is still in his prime. And if he's healthy, this is going to end up being an incredible acquisition for Houston. And I think that's the situation. And maybe bringing in back wide receiver Braxton Berrios today from Miami kind of gives some injury insurance to back up Christian Kirk. But the good thing is Christian Kirk, that's what's held him back in Jacksonville has been the injuries. But that also means fresh legs and a guy that's ready to go and be on a prove it situation with the Texans.
So when Kirk came, there was a lot of conversation about he fills the role as the slot receiver. Dell did that a bit last year when he was healthy. Kirk can step in there. Braxton Berrios, he's not a household name. He's not a DK Metcalf type of player. He's 29 years old. What do you think he brings to this team? I mean, he's sort of a journeyman wide receiver.
Yeah. This is his 8th season in the NFL, but he's 29 years old, so he is not old. In fact, he's real young. But he's been with the Patriots, the Jets, and the Dolphins, and we've got him on the cheap. 1 year, $2 million. And I think he's the one that's going to emerge as a threat alongside Christian Kirk in the slot. So I think that's what we do with him. And it doesn't cost us much. So I think that's what their hope is for him. And yeah, I think them together could be a really great tandem. So
well, of course, it all begins with Nico Collins. You got Dalton Schultz at tight end, and then you've got Berrios and Kirk. Mechie's still here.
Mhm.
Hopefully he continues to develop.
And we'll see how Stephon Diggs plays out in free agency and coming off an ACL injury.
Well,
So,
now, of course, the Texans do have more capital they could spend and bring back Stephon Diggs if they would like. But if they spend a lot of money, they're going to need to spend it on O-line.
Yeah,
I mean,
they
I
are.
don't know how they
Yeah,
get
they are.
one. This is the conversation. Maybe there's a trade to be had, one of those trades where you give up a limited amount of draft capital and take on a big salary in the O-line. They could do that, but it's going to be a real test. Who's going to give up a great offensive lineman at this point in the draft? Who's going to, in the cycle, who's going to give up a left tackle in a trade to the Texans? This is what worries me. They're probably relegating themselves to the draft and starting an offensive rookie at tackle next year, but time will tell.
Time will tell.
We've got to go to break, or maybe Tony Pauline will tell.
Yeah,
he is coming up
that'll be the
next. He is
best.
one of the foremost experts in the NFL draft. It will be Tony Pauline up next year. We will ask him what is in the draft that could be part of a Caserio plan to shore up the offensive line. That up next year on ESPN Radio 97.5 and 92.5.
You're listening to The Boss
and The Gloss
on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.
Presented by Tony's. Tony's Restaurant, the city's top fine dining experience.
From the Veritex Community Bank Studios, here's David Gow.
And Carla Dawson.
Welcome back. And we are now joined by Tony Pauline. He, of course, you can find his work. He's a top NFL draft expert. And you can find his work at Sportskeeda Pro Football. Tony, welcome to the show. You're on with David and Carla.
Thanks for having me.
Well, your timing is perfect because we're sitting here scratching our heads wondering who's going to play offensive line next year for the Texans. Of course, they cut Shaq Mason. Laramie Tunsil was traded to the Commanders today. And a lot of the best players who might have been available in free agency or in trades seemingly have already made the move. So I'd love to get your take on it and then look ahead into this draft. Who do you think might be available to them at number 25 to fill the offensive spots they need to close.
Yeah, I was a little surprised that they traded Tunzel, given, he is a left tackle. That is a priority position. And I mean, he's still a good player. I don't know that Blake Fisher is going to be the answer at the left tackle position. In my mock draft that was posted right after the combine, ironically, I had the Texans taking Josh Connerly, the offensive lineman from Oregon, although I listed him as an interior offensive lineman. Now, Connerly played left tackle at Oregon the past 3 years and did a phenomenal job of it. And the question is he tall enough to play left tackle, or are teams going to be turned off by the fact that he's not a 6'5", tackle on the left side? He was just over 6'4.5", 33.5-inch arms. Some teams will get maybe a bit turned off by those metrics at the left tackle spot, but the fact is the guy is a phenomenal blocker. I think he's a perfect fit for the Houston Texans system. So that's where I had him, and he can fill two needs. Probably he can't play them both at the same time, but he'll fill a need on the offensive line for the Texans.
And Tony, you got over 20 years experience in this industry. And do you think, given what the Texans have done the last 2 years, do you think they have a plan, or was this a knee-jerk reaction for what seemingly is culture and a lot of penalties that they're getting rid of?
Yeah, I'm having difficulty hearing you. I told the producer if they can turn it up a little bit. I didn't hear the question. I apologize.
Okay, no worries. Can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Okay, I was going to ask Tony, with your 20 years of experience covering the NFL and looking at the Texans of the past 2 years, not before that seemingly have a plan for what they're doing. Do you think that this was a planned move they've got a succession plan in place or something that they're going to do? Or was this a knee-jerk reaction to, we got to get rid of this amount of penalties and we got to get rid of what he does to our culture, which is not positive here in Houston?
No, I think it's a planned move. I mean, they've done a good job the past couple of years in the draft. Yeah. They don't spend huge money in free agency. I think this was definitely a planned move, and they were younger teams, so they want to continue. I don't want to say the youth movement, but they've got some younger players there. I don't think this is a rash, off-the-cuff move. I mean, literally from the first draft of this regime, where first they took Will Anderson, and then they took C.J. Stroud, and they moved back up to get Will Anderson. I think there's a good give and take between the coach and the general manager in that front office. So I don't think they do not come off as sort of rash people who are reactionary. Rather, they think the process through.
Okay, I love that. Thank you, Tony. That's great clarification.
All right, Tony, let's talk more broadly about the draft. It's always fascinating to slot these quarterbacks, and everything I'm reading is it's not a great quarterback class. The Cam Ward, Shadir Sanders would not be ranked highly if you were to compare them to the quarterbacks of last year. Is that fair? And then do you think these quarterbacks will go in the first 2, 3? I mean, Dart's another one that now some people think could go as high as number 3, with the Giants desperately needed a quarterback as well. What will happen with these quarterbacks at the top of the draft?
I would be shocked if Jackson Dart is the 3rd pick of the draft. I think what happens is, with the draft anyway, once the Super Bowl is over, you get a lot of people who start writing about the draft and commenting about the draft and don't follow the draft year round. Now, I think your first point is valid. If Cam Ward was in last year's draft, which he could have been because he was a senior,
right?
If he was in last year's draft, I mean, he's a day 3 pick. But based on his play this year, he's probably the 4th quarterback selected after your top 3. But Cam Ward has had a sensational season. He's going to be the first quarterback selected. He's very likely going to be the first player selected in the draft. And in this draft, he deserves that. I think Shadir Sanders is a guy that's dropping. He's dropping for a variety of reasons. The 2024 film just wasn't good. It wasn't as good as 2023. And you look at Jaden Daniels, you look at Michael Penix, you look at Bo Nix. You always want to get that quarterback that is coming off a real good season. Shadir Sanders really isn't. And then there's some things that bother people. I mean, he really has had a lot of self-inflicted wounds leading up to the draft, through the draft process, the whole thing with the Shrine game where he showed up and people were hoping he was going to throw, and all he did was show up one day in sweats and then left, and then the combine when he didn't work out. That's not going to help you with your future employers that are going to sign you to a contract that's worth tens of millions of dollars. I think Shedeur Sanders will go in the first round. He's going to go a little bit later. I had him going to New Orleans. He could go a little bit later than that. Jackson Dart, I mean, he's a good quarterback, but he's more of a system guy. Could he go first round? Yeah, maybe late in the first round. Could he go to the New York Giants? Well, yeah, he could go to the New York Giants in round 2. He's not going to go. The Giants are not going to take Jackson Dart. They're not going to reach for Jackson Dart with that third pick when they could be looking at an Abdul Carter or a Travis Hunter or really a top flight player in this year's draft.
You know, Tony, that's such a good point, except I don't trust the New York Giants. They could take him at 3. I don't know. But at this point, you did mention Travis Hunter, my favorite utility man. Where do you see him landing? And any chance the Raiders could get him at number 6?
I'm sorry, which player? Travis Hunter. I'm sorry. Yeah, I would be surprised when you look at the team selecting in front of the Raiders, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who need a cornerback, who could use another receiver. Even the Cleveland Browns, who just traded for Kenny Pickett today, and Kenny Pickett may be a bridge quarterback until Deshaun Watson gets back on the field. They could use a guy like Travis Hunter. I think the only way Travis Hunter slides to the Raiders is if somehow he turns in a terrible pro day workout, if he even decides to work out at a pro day.
And let's say he doesn't, which I think you're probably right. Who do you think the Raiders do target at number 6?
I had the Raiders taking Jalen Walker out of Georgia. This was before they signed Max Crosby to that huge deal. I think Jalen Walker is an underrated player in this draft. He's a 3-down linebacker. He's not just an edge rusher. A little bit shorter than you want at 6'1". I mean, could they take Will Campbell, an offensive lineman? That is a possibility. He is the best offensive lineman in this year's draft. Arms were a little bit shorter than what you want at a left tackle, at just over 32.5 inches. But he's an athletic guy. He's a mobile guy. He fits that system. So I think they could go with Walker. I think they could take Will Campbell right now as well.
We're talking with Tony Pauline, one of the foremost experts in the NFL draft. Want to ask you about the number of players who have first-round grades. I keep reading it's a limited number of players, a smaller number of players with first-round grades this year. Maybe only 12 or 14 qualify. Is that a fair analysis? How do you break it down?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I have a few more than that. I have 18. But, I mean, really, your top guys are Abdul Carter and then Travis Hunter. Cam Ward's going to be taken early because of the fact that he plays the quarterback position. There's no true generational talent in this year's draft. There's no Trevor Lawrence, no Myles Garrett, no player like that in this year's draft. And that's a combination of players going back because of NIL deals. But college now is a lucrative business for some of these guys. Go back and play another year on the college level, try and improve your game as Cam Ward did, as Tyler Warren of Penn State did. But right now, I think you're looking at legitimately 16 to 18 legitimate first-round grades. 12 is a little bit shy, a little bit low.
So, Tony, best player available, regardless of need, who is it in your mind?
Abdul Carter, for a variety of reasons. I know people look at Abdul Carter this year as a pass rusher, and I say, listen, you got to go back and watch Abdul Carter in 2022, 2023, when he was used more as a linebacker at Penn State. And he was running sideline to sideline, making plays in pursuit against the run, making plays in coverage. And then you factor in the pass rushing ability that he showed a little bit in 2023, really took off in 2024. I know it's a quarterback world and everybody goes crazy for the quarterbacks, but there was a time when the NFL draft where the impact defensive player was highly coveted. And I think Abdul Carter is, in fact, that impact defensive player.
We're talking with Tony Pauline here on ESPN Radio 97.5. Okay, this draft has two elite tight ends in Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. Do you think, I mean, tight ends, it hasn't been discounted. It's not discounted like the running back position. And Carla's Raiders got Brock Bowers last year. He was outstanding as a rookie. Do you think both these tight ends can go, say, in the first half of the first round?
I think at least one of them will. And neither of them are Brock Bowers. I think one of them will, and I think it's going to be Tyler Warren, although I have Colston Loveland rated higher. Now, why is that? Colston Loveland has a significant shoulder injury. He may not be playing for a while. So I think a team like the Chicago Bears, a team like the Indianapolis Colts, who want a tight end to get on the field quickly, maybe the New York Jets, although that will bring back visions of Kyle Brady when he was selected in 1995 for people who remember that.
Right.
But Tyler Warren, he's very good in a variety of ways. He's a good pass catcher. He's a good blocker. I mean, he's a team player. Teams like a lot of things about him. Colston Loveland is more of your downfield guy. I think you're going to have at least one of them selected in the top half of round one. I think both of them will end up as first-round choices.
Okay, let me ask you about the running back position. Where is Gene T on your board, and then where do you think he will actually end up?
Yeah, it's a good question. Ashton Jeanty right now is the fifth-rated player on my board. He's a tremendous three-down back. A pass catcher, can run on the inside, can turn the corner. In my recent mock draft, I had him going to the Chicago Bears. I would be shocked if he gets past the Dallas Cowboys. With the 10th pick, I would be shocked if he gets past the Dallas Cowboys at 12.
Boy, he would be a great addition for the Bears to get some pressure off of Caleb Williams and run behind this rejuvenated offensive line in which they've just made a big investment. That would be fascinating to watch.
I think that's perfectly stated. I mean, they put a lot of money in the offensive line, to protect Caleb Williams. Ben Johnson's there, and don't forget when Ben Johnson was in Detroit, they used an early pick on a running back by the name of Jahmyr Gibbs. So
yes,
although he wasn't making the decisions, sure he had input, and I'm going to have a lot of input in Chicago.
Awesome stuff. He's Tony Pauline. You guys just heard him. You can find his work at Sportskeeda Pro Football. Tony, I really appreciate your joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, when we come back, we are going to be joined by Jeremy Branham, whom you know here, of course, on the Killer Bees, and we will ask him who will be the starting offensive left tackle for the Texans next year. Maybe that's not a fair question for him. Jeremy Branham up next year on ESPN Radio 97.5 and 92.5.
You're listening to The Boss
and the Gloss.
on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.
Presented by Tony's. Tony's Restaurant, the city's top fine dining experience.
From the Veritex Community Bank Studios, here's David Gow.
And Carla Dawson.
Welcome back. You are, in fact, listening to The Boss and the Gloss, and we are joined now by someone you all know, Jeremy Branham, of course, of the Killer Bees. Jeremy, welcome to the show. You're on with David and Carla.
Hello. Good to be on with you as always. Hope you guys are doing well.
Well, we are doing well. We've been wrestling with the big news that came out this afternoon, the trade of Larry Tunsil. Whom will the Texans pick? I'm sure you covered it on your show, but tell us what you think the plan is, or is there a plan behind this trade of Larry Tunsil to the Commanders?
I think the plan in the short term is just to go with Titus Howard at left tackle and Blake Fisher at right tackle. Now, if they're on the clock at 25 and they like a tackle more than one of those two guys, I think that they would change their plan going into next season, depending on that. You know, Nick Caserio is not bashful by any stretch of the imagination moving up in the draft, so maybe he falls in love with the prospect between now and draft day and trades to the teams to draft his future left or right tackle. But I think that they're comfortable playing Titus Howard at left tackle. He played there some when Larry Tunsil was hurt a few years ago. Actually performed there better than any of his other positions. You don't draft a guy in the second round like Blake Fisher a year ago and then have him as a reserve offensive lineman. So I think the plan is that those two guys are your tackles, and then they find a way to get better in the interior, whether it's in free agency, whether it's by trade or the draft. I think this had more financial ramifications in the future than we were really willing to let on at the beginning of the trade. Right when you hear it, it's like, oh, they must not like his personality. Tunsil only has 2 years left on his deal. He's always very proactive on when he signs new deals, and usually it's at the top of the market, at the top of the left tackle market. And like the Texans have a lot of players to pay over the next few years. C.J. Stroud's going to have to get paid. Will Anderson's going to have to get paid. Derek Stingley's probably going to get paid late this offseason, probably at the top cornerback in the game type of money. So I think that it's more financial than anything else. And then the Texans get a okay-ish return in the meantime.
Do you feel comfortable with Titus Howard at the left tackle?
I don't
He's
think I
injured
feel
a lot.
comfortable with Titus Howard anywhere on the offensive line. Ever since he blasted me on Twitter, Carla, I've not been too pleased with what Titus Howard.
I'm in your camp, Jeremy.
We're on your side.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think I would have been let go if you weren't. So that's the good news. No, I say that mostly tongue in cheek. I think he is an above average offensive lineman. I think he gets probably more criticism than is warranted. Doesn't help that he's been on one of the bottom offensive lines in football this last year. He's pretty vocal on social media, although he got off of social media last year, which doesn't always work in his favor. He posted on his bio that he was a tackle only, which, fans see that like, okay, well, you're not really a team guy. But then he moved to left guard, so he showed that he was a team guy. I like him more than the public perception. Do I feel confident with him at left tackle? Probably not. And it is a bit weird that you had one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL last year, and you traded easily your best offensive lineman.
That's what we just said.
Yeah, you're putting a lot on the plate of new offensive coordinator Nick Caley and new offensive line coach Cole Popovich, who was on the staff. So that's a big ask for a couple of assistants that are getting their first crack at their new positions.
No kidding, which makes me think, I mean, in D'Amico, I trust. I'm not so sure about Nick, but in D'Amico, I trust. So I've got to believe there's a plan there. But you're right. They need to be prepared to pay CJ. But I'll tell you what, he's a lot cheaper on his back than he is on his feet. And let's keep him on his feet. So, wow. It's just, wow. I don't know what else to say. I hope they have a plan. I'm gonna be positive about that.
So it's Jeremy Branham joining us here on the Boss and the Gloss. I want to ask you about the wide receiver moves. The Texans, of course, got Christian Kirk, and then they got Braxton Berrios. How do you break them down? What kind of additions are they to this roster?
I'll start with Berrios first. I think he's more of a special teams guy. You caught as many passes as Braxton Berrios did last year in the NFL. None. But Berrios is a really good returner. A few years ago, he was AP first-team kick returner, so he's going to help in the return game it seems like Caserio likes to keep a designated returner on the roster. Last year, they kept 7 receivers on their initial 53, which is kind of unheard of. But maybe it was actually 6 with Steven Sims as the designated returner. So I think he likes him from that point of view. Berrios was also drafted by New England in 2018. That Caserio was with New England in 2018. So I think that it's probably a Caserio favorite. I think he's really the return guy. Anything he helps you with in the receiving game, I think will be a bonus. And I really don't anticipate him to help too much offensively. I think it's mostly in the return side. Christian Kirk, I like him as a player. The injuries, he has been a bit injury prone the last couple of years, so that kind of spooks me there a bit.
Yeah, 14 games in 2 seasons.
Yeah, had the broken collarbone last season. So, like how much is he? I think he's healthy, but will he stay healthy? And also, I was wondering when they first traded for him about the financials and how that would look based on the free agent wide receiver class. And $16 million is about what they're going to be on the hook for with Christian Kirk, which seemed like a lot at the time. But then you see some of these free agent moves today. Like Darius Slayton's getting $12 million a year. Joshua Palmer's getting $12 million a year. Diami Brown is getting $10 million a year. So if those guys are getting 10, 12 million, Kirk's getting 16. I think he's by far a better football player than what the current market is for wide receivers. So I like that move quite a bit by Caserio.
And we take him from a division rival, which is even better. I like that kind of thing. So Jeremy, you are a broadcaster for U of H basketball, and how exciting. I mean, yet another great season. In their season finale Saturday night, they outlasted Baylor 65-61. But better than that was that they secured an undefeated road record in Big 12 play. I mean, come on, 10 road wins, 10 road games, 10 wins. So, and I read today that they became the only team in D1's men's basketball to finish unbeaten on the road this season, which is nothing short of everything else amazing that they're doing. How difficult is it? And there were close calls against like UCF and Kansas in double overtime, but how difficult is it to hit this kind of a milestone in arguably one of the toughest conferences in the country, if not the toughest?
As close to impossible as it gets. You mentioned the only team this season. They're the first Big 12 team to sweep the road portion of their schedule since the 2019-20 season. Kansas in the 2019-20 season went undefeated. Now, what was different about Kansas and Houston is that Kansas did it in an 18-game Big 12 schedule. Houston did it in a 20-game Big 12 schedule. Houston's the first major conference school in history ever in college basketball to go 10-0 on the road in a major conference. So it's historic. And, a lot of sports fans really don't give the credit to regular seasons, right? Like it's mostly what you do in the tournament. How deep do you go is how a team is defined by most sports fans. And what Houston did in the regular season, I think is one of the better regular seasons we've seen in college basketball in some time. 27-4. You win 19 games in the 20-game Big. They went 19-1 in the Big 12. They won the Big 12 by 4 games, which is either the second or third best college basketball conference, depending on who you ask. And that's a record. That's a Big 12 record for the most wins in Big 12 play. Really historic regular season. Number 3 team in the country. It's been a lot of fun. Another to how great a coach Kelvin Sampson is. The Big 12 sent out their awards today. He won another Big 12 Coach of the Year, so his second season back in the Big 12, wins the Big 12 Coach of the Year. It's a really, really good team. They're really well coached, and they make you proud, too, as an alum. I'm an alumnus at the University of Houston, and the way they play, puts a smile to my face because they play hard. They're going to be usually the team that plays the hardest, that works the hardest. They bring their lunch pail to work every day, and they get after you. So I like that style a lot. I like teams that play hard. I like players that play hard. So when they bring that effort and attitude to each and every game is something that brings a smile to my face.
No kidding, Jeremy. And I think this lunch pail work ethic that they have, it really just speaks to me so much about what Kelvin Sampson has done with that culture and how important culture is. I mean, culture alone can't win anything, but when you have culture along with this talent that they have, especially with their 40% 3-point shooting and their backcourt starters, is just unbelievable. But why do you think that Kelvin Sampson, and really honestly this program, doesn't get the national recognition that, like, the Dukes and the Floridas and the Auburns and the Alabamas? What is it? I mean, we've got history here too. And I think given the recent history, this is the best team that we've fielded probably in the Kelvin Sampson era. So speak to both those things, his recognition or lack of, and then do you think this is the best roster U of H has put out? And can they go deep?
I think it speaks to Houston in general. I think that when we talk about it from a national perspective, a lot of folks have the big brand, right? Or the East Coast bias is something we've always heard in the city of Houston in any sport. You look at baseball, why aren't the Astros in their historic run talked about nearly as much as whenever the Yankees had their historic run or the Red Sox were winning a title? And I think it does speak to that bias. I do think the teams in the Northeast or the bigger brands, they get kind of preferential treatment, or they're talked about more. It is because there's more people that pay attention. Maybe they have a bigger audience for that, maybe. And I think at the college level, one angle to look at it is from. I think the SEC has probably gotten that treatment now, and it's well deserved. I think the SEC has been the best football conference for forever. They're really making strides in basketball, and if you look at computer metrics, if you look at strength of conference, the SEC is at the very top.
Yeah.
So I think the SEC has earned that, quite frankly, and I have a lot of respect for the SEC. But because of that, I do think that they put them as the focal point. And look, the money's behind that too.
Sure.
Big 12 certainly has a contract with ESPN, but it's not as big as the contract that they have with the SEC. So I feel like they probably feel like they owe it to the league. There's an obligation there. It's well earned by the SEC. So I think it's the same thing we see from the professional levels. The Texans could be a divisional round team, but are they going to be talked about as much as the Giants and the Jets or the Cowboys? Probably not nationally. Same thing with the Astros. The Astros win a couple of titles, and they don't get talked about as often as some other teams that won a couple of titles. And they focus more on scandal than they do the winning pedigree. And then we saw that with the Rockets, for a long time. Is that they look at the brands and then probably the recognition, and then also the fans and the followers that they have because of that. At least that's my opinion. As far as the best roster Sampson's had, I would say it's in the conversation. I haven't looked at year by year roster versus roster, but in terms of just a true college basketball team, this is up there. I think there's been other teams that have had better pro prospects. Jarris Walker was a top 10 pick, but left after his freshman year. Marcus Sasser was a first rounder. Jamal Shedd last year was a second round pick. Quentin Grimes was a first round pick. So he probably doesn't have the NBA player that he's had in the past, but you look at what they're currently doing on the floor. Jawan Roberts, he's been an institution at U of H, has the most wins in Cougar basketball history. LJ Cryer's really good college basketball player. They're veteran, they're old, they're seasoned, they're battle tested. So yeah, they're certainly in the conversation.
All right, he's Jeremy Branham. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to give you all the credit for the Cougs' success this year. I think it's the storytelling, the play-by-play work you're doing.
Yeah, that's what they always say, right? These teams win the championships. You're like, it's the radio guy that puts the team on their back.
It's the play-by-play broadcaster. That's the whole reason we're here.
That's how we see it.
You do you, Jeremy. I love it.
All right, thanks so much for joining us. When we come back, we're going to look at the quarterback carousel. It seems like the game of musical chairs has almost just ended overnight.
My goodness.
There's still one or two names out there to talk about. We'll be right back here on ESPN Radio 97.5 and 92.5.
This is The Boss
and the Gloss.
on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.
Presented by Tony's. Tony's Restaurant, the city's top fine dining experience.
From the Veritex Community Bank Studios, here's David Gow.
And Carla Dawson.
Welcome back. And we've been talking over the last few weeks over the quarterback carousel, or the game of musical chairs. Which quarterback will land with which team? Lots of teams with needs, very few quarterbacks available. And I think the first domino to drop was your Raiders when they made the trade to get Geno Smith from the Seahawks. That surprised me a bit. The Seahawks ready to move on from Geno Smith. They made the trade to the Raiders. What do you think he brings to the Raiders? Raiders giving up a third-round draft pick for Geno Smith.
You know, he's 34 years old. Did you know he was that old? I think that's pretty amazing. I was surprised about that. They didn't give up that much. They gave up a 2025 third-round pick for him. I think he brings stability because Pete Carroll is the one who resurrected his career in Seattle. So I think I really love the trio of Pete Carroll, GM John Spytek, new GM, and Tom Brady. And I think they really kicked things off earlier in the week before they signed Geno Smith. They signed Max Crosby. He was at that time the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL until Myles Garrett did his deal. But that's important to get Max Crosby set. And then I love that they went after Geno Smith because, as we were talking about in the break, if Las Vegas decides to go, if there's a quarterback they like available and get it in this draft, we could have an Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes situation with Geno Smith being a bridge, a really good bridge, and helping a youngster along because good Geno, he is over a 70% completion ratio, 4,320 yards. This is in his 5 years in Seattle, a $5 million, 103-year, 21 TDs, 15 interceptions, not great, which was the third most in the NFL. But I think they can clean that up because he didn't have a great line in Seattle. He didn't have much in Seattle. And remember, in Las Vegas, we have Max Crosby on the other side of the ball that just got signed. And we've got Brock Bowers, who had an absolute breakout rookie season. He was probably more outstanding than we even thought he would be. So I think we're putting Geno Smith in a great situation. And I think Geno Smith is bridging a great situation in Las Vegas. And there's no learning curve between he and Pete Carroll at all. This is a very
speak the same language right away.
Yep.
I do think the ideal, and it may well happen, that Shadir Sanders falls to number 6.
Oh, I would be so
There's been a lot of negativity about him, and then that does set up Geno to be a great bridge for the rookie. Although when I look at the top of that draft, you got the Titans and, of course, the Browns and then the Giants. All three of them arguably need to draft a quarterback, and there are really only two that weren't going that high. So I've got to believe that the two, Ward and Sanders, will come off in the first 3 picks. But we've been surprised by other things before. And Sanders is getting some heat out in the market. They're worried about his attitude, about whether he's a good teammate, whether he's too cocky. I don't know. I think he would be a great pick for the Raiders at 6 if he were to fall.
And I look at Shadir Sanders this past season, and I look what his dad has done in Colorado to go from a 1-win team. In the first year, you're a 4-win team. So you've quadrupled your wins in 1 year. And then to a 9-win team. Like that's unheard of. And Shadur is a big part of that, to be honest, because last year for Colorado, he was sacked 42 times. And under all of that, that's pretty much constant pressure because of that O-line of a sieve in Boulder. And he only threw 15 interceptions. Go to Will Howard at Ohio State, national champions. He was sacked 10 times last year and threw 15 picks. Same amount of picks, less than 1/4 the amount of pressure. So for me, with Shadur, I'm like, hey, this guy knows pressure. He had it, and he performed well under pressure. He really did. So I like him. I like him a lot, and I think his upside, that's what the draft is. It's potential. I like his potential, and I like his upside, and he's got an incredible work ethic, and his dad is unbelievable. So, and his dad's not going to put up with his dad was a workhorse himself and excelled at everything. So I love Shadur. I would be really excited if he fell to the Raiders. That would be really happy for me. I don't see that happening, but maybe so.
Okay. Geno Smith goes to the Raiders, and it wasn't always precisely this order. They almost came simultaneously, some of these things, but Sam Darnold signs with the Seahawks.
Well, thank goodness, because the Seahawks are getting rid of everybody. Who is going to be in Seattle?
Fair point.
Jeez.
Tyler Lockett is gone.
Yep.
DK Metcalf was traded to the Steelers.
Yep.
So there you sit. I mean, Sam Darnold had an abundance of weapons with the Vikings last year, and they're in a bit of a rebuild mode there with the Seahawks. And then, breaking news, Justin Fields signs with the Jets. What a crazy ride they've had at the quarterback position with Kyle Wilson and then Aaron Rodgers, and now they've got Justin Fields. I would love to think Justin Fields, by all accounts, is a super individual. I'd love to think he's found his permanent home, but his whole career has been rocky. He's been a bit of a journeyman after being taken in the first round.
He has. And, I think for both Darnold and Fields, it's, Peaches and Herb reunited, and it feels so good because Darnold, his whole career was changed when he was the backup in San Francisco under Clint Kubiak, who is now the OC in Seattle. So this is a great reunion for Sam Darnold. And he says, when he had his breakout year with the Vikings, it really came from what he learned under Clint Kubiak and Kyle Shanahan.
And more so than I give Kevin O'Connell a lot of credit for that offense in Minnesota.
Too, for sure.
Yeah.
And they had so many weapons too. And Kevin O'Connell is brilliant. Weapons. But Sam Darnold went from seeing ghosts in New York to God knows what happened in Carolina. We don't even know that. But he got confidence again in San Francisco into the Kubiak Shanahan system, and he will be reunited and he will be the successor. I mean, Seattle now has their successor for Geno Smith, who spent a really great 5 years in Seattle with his career revived. And for Justin Fields, I think I'm a little head scratching with Pittsburgh because I think if you're choosing between Aaron Rodgers and even Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson versus a Justin Fields is 4-2 as a starter for Pittsburgh. He's not expensive and he's zero drama. Like he's a very likable teammate. Russell Wilson will be in a $20 million range, I would think. Aaron Rodgers is going to be, he's got high 30s range. They're expensive. Aaron Rodgers was 5-12 last year as a starter. I don't know Russell Wilson's record off the hand. And they both bring drama to locker rooms and in the press. So I'm like, wow, that kind of surprised me with Pittsburgh letting Fields move on. And for him, for Justin Fields, his reunited is with Garrett Wilson, his former teammate at Ohio State. So I think that's going to be a nice little transition. And I like the new regime in New York, but it's really hard to have confidence in anything Jets.
Yes, one report had that the Steelers were open to re-signing Justin Fields and were considering that, but Fields said, well, no, I want to go test the marketplace.
He did.
So it may well be that the Steelers didn't have that option, that Fields wanted to go elsewhere. Some even inferred, who knows if this is true, that Fields was feeling slighted. I mean, he did have a 4-2 record as a starter for the Steelers, as you've noted, and then they benched him in favor of Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson seemingly threw the deep ball better than Justin Fields, but I'm sure Justin Fields was disappointed not to get to continue to be the starter, and evidently he wanted to go and try somewhere else where he could be the lone guy, and he will have that opportunity with the Jets.
And I think that you nailed it. I think that's exactly it.
So the Steelers have a big question looming, and that, of course, is who should be their quarterback, and it looks like it's going to come down to two guys, Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. When we come back, we're going to talk about who should be the Steelers quarterback. They've got a lot of talent there now, and they've got DK Metcalf they picked up today. A great defense. If they could get a good quarterback, they could be a very serious contender. But it looks like it's just two guys left. We'll break that down when we return here on ESPN Radio 97.5 and 92.5. Welcome back. And when we went to break, we were talking about the quarterback carousel. Seemingly, so many people have found their seat. Sam Darnold going to the Seahawks, Justin Fields to the Jets, Geno Smith now with the Raiders. But one curious head-scratching question: who will start at quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers next year? Justin Fields gone. Russell Wilson could return, but it really is going to come down to, it looks like, Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. Two veterans, two guys clearly past their prime, but the Steelers are going to bet on a veteran, Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. Which is the better pick there?
Yikes.
Yikes.
That's all I'm saying. And as we talked about in the last segment, Russell Wilson will be in the $20 million-ish range. For a quarterback, that's not bad, but for him,
well, and given
he's on
that
the sunset
they had him last
career.
year and he took him as far as he could take them, what will be different? If you bring back Russell Wilson, I would have a hard time understanding, why do I believe this year will be the year that will really do it right? Because they really tailed off down the stretch last season. Russell Wilson seemingly hit a ceiling there. He had a few good games where he threw the ball very deep, very well, but I just don't see how you could convince yourself that Russell Wilson is the answer next year when he wasn't the answer last year, which then takes you to Aaron Rodgers.
Yikes. I mean, I think to answer your first question, David, I think that what they're hoping with the DK Metcalf trade is that they now have, they've got two number one wide receivers in George Pickens and DK Metcalf.
Excellent point, because that is a difference for next year versus last year. I think DK Metcalf is exceptional.
He's exceptional.
And there is a story of DK Metcalf runs the deep route down the sideline well, and he can do the back shoulder catches. And the deep route over the top and the back shoulder throws are something Russell Wilson does very well. So those two might well match up pretty effectively.
And I think that George Pickens is a bit of a drama, but if they can get along well together, that's going to solve a lot of problems for Pittsburgh for sure.
Okay, the story now, though, is the Steelers are considering Aaron Rodgers. They've been in discussions with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers clearly wants to play again, and there aren't a lot of quarterback spots left around the league. Aaron Rodgers to the Steelers. Aaron Rodgers playing for Mike Tomlin. Is that an intriguing matchup? It's so interesting to me because Tomlin
might turn into WWE.
Well, there may be. The one thing, let me try to play the card here.
Okay, give it to me.
Is that we worry about Aaron Rodgers and his influence on the culture. I don't think his presence was great in the Jets locker room. His presence and his attitude was part of the reason he was shipped out of Green Bay. But the Steelers' culture is defined by Mike Tomlin. Even when you had guys like Le'Veon Bell and Antonio
Brown,
those very vocal prima donna wide receiver and running back in that case, Tomlin was able to hold it all together. When those guys went elsewhere, when Antonio Brown went elsewhere, he melted down. Bell melted down. But
yeah, they didn't do anything.
But Tomlin kept him on the straight and narrow. And if anyone could keep Rodgers on track, have him talk less to the media, define a culture with Aaron Rodgers in the locker room, it strikes me it's Mike Tomlin.
I do agree with you there. I mean, Mike Tomlin is the longest tenured coach, 17 years, never had a losing season in Pittsburgh. And I think, what the good and bad with that is that you've never had a record that would allow you to get a really great quarterback. You're just kind of in a no man's land. You get there almost. So you're kind of stuck. So they do have to bring in somebody. I would really caution against, you talked about the really good culture that they have in Pittsburgh. Aaron Rodgers, to me, is this going to be strong? He's a culture killer. I'm sorry. I've watched it happen everywhere that he's gone. And I think, as we get older, although you and I don't get that much older, but as people get older, their filter comes off. They become more set in their ways. Do you really see him acquiescing to Mike Tomlin or the Pittsburgh culture or anything like that? The Pittsburgh has a great ownership group. They have a great GM in Omar Khan. They have a great head coach in Mike Tomlin. They've got two diva wide receivers that they need to be very careful with because they're both super, super talented. I would not bring in a 5-12 from last season's Jets, Aaron Rodgers, who's coming off an Achilles year. Well, he played 1 year after the Achilles, and he's 41, about to be 42 years old. I don't see it. I know he's a 4-time MVP, but he is so prickly. And to me, he is just a culture killer. I don't know. But you're right. There's not really that many options. Russell Wilson knows the system. He knows, I mean, he's not their answer either. But
Well, what's interesting to me, the Steelers
I
know
don't know,
Russell
it's
Wilson
frustrating.
well. He just played for them.
Yep.
And they haven't been
They're not
chasing-
enamored.
They're not
No.
chasing him around town to sign him. They're out talking to Aaron Rodgers. So it would seem they've come to some conclusion there. The one thing, the better thing that the Steelers have that the Jets didn't have, Mike Tomlin and the culture, yes. The other thing is Aaron Rodgers has no other options. He can't sit around and
That's right.
dictate and go off into his darkness
Pat
retreat
McAfee show.
and say and do this. I mean, if I were the Steelers, I would do what the Jets were trying to do when they were having one last round of conversations with Aaron Rodgers. Remember, before the Jets cut him, they were talking to him about saying, look, if you come back, you cannot go on the Pat McAfee show and do an interview every week. And I think the Steelers now, as the last resort for Aaron Rodgers, could really lay down the law and say, this is the way you have to comport yourself. This is what we're going to let you do. We don't want you doing the Pat McAfee show. Every week he would go on that Pat McAfee show. Pat McAfee is sensationalist and all the blowhard stuff. They would always get Aaron Rodgers to say something provocative that would be headlines across the league. Sometimes it was about his own team. Sometimes it was about other teams, but it didn't matter. It was still headline grabbing and just the distraction when he would walk into that Jets locker room. I think if the Steelers bring him in, they're going to lay down the law. I would set it up with fines if he does stuff that just is out of bounds and culture killing. And I think you could define some of that contractually, and it starts with comments in the media. Shut him down, shut him up, make him play football, and see if he's got something left. The one optimistic thought about him on the football field is it does take a long time to recover from an Achilles. It may well be, I mean, it's really hard at his age, but it may well be that after a year, last year was his first year back, that he could move around a little bit better, that he'd get that ability to shuffle in the pocket as he used to do so effectively way back in Green Bay. But it's been a long, long time.
Yeah, he did not move well last season, period. He didn't. And remember, he was miraculous in his recovery. Remember, he was on the sidelines season before last saying, I'm like ready to go.
Oh, well, the claim that he was going to recover and return to the field in the same season as the Achilles tear was just an odd statement. And that's, again, one of those strange comments that he made out into the media that was a big headline grabbing thing. No medical authority was going to back him up. Nobody has ever returned from an Achilles tear in the same season. And yet it became a big topic. And it probably couldn't have been good in the Jets locker room, because then they were all looking around. Gosh, is it really possible? He says he's going to come back, when it was never consideration that he was going to come back. And it's not good for the other guys playing quarterback to have Aaron Rodgers sitting there saying, yeah, I'm coming back. It doesn't give them the latitude, the voice in the locker room. The amazing thing is, even when he was injured and not able to play in that season, he was still the loudest voice coming off of that locker room.
He was on the sidelines with the headset, remember? He's always got to be seen and heard.
And always going on the Pat McAfee show and saying something that was a big headline. He was always the most vocal, biggest presence for the Jets, even when he wasn't playing. You got to put that in a box if you bring him to the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I agree. And I do agree with you that I think if any coach could do it, it would be Mike Tomlin, because I don't think Aaron Rodgers has he's had issues with every coach, Mike McCarthy, Matt LaFleur, Robert Saleh, sideline altercations, changing the play calls, whatever he does. So you have to be ready. If you're going to bring him on for talent, you have to be ready that you've got to lay down the hammer.
It's interesting to think about the Steelers now, because they did get DK Metcalf, who was arguably the best wide receiver available this offseason.
They signed him to 5 years, $150 million.
Yeah, that's a big time deal. And it seems almost atypical of the Steelers. The Steelers aren't known for big hirings. They're more of a draft and develop type team. And to trade for a star and then sign that kind of contract for the star feels very atypical for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But DK Metcalf may well be worth that trouble.
Well, what's interesting is it was on this past Wednesday, that DJ Metcalf requested a trade out of Seattle. Geno Smith had already gone by that point. Or no, maybe Geno Smith went later. Anyway, he's only 27, entering the final year of his 3-year, $72 million extension that he signed in 2022. He had 1 year left with Seattle at $18 million on the current contract extension. And he said when he requested the trade, I want to go to a contender and I want to go to a place that is warm. So all of a sudden, he's going to a place that's cold and is not particularly a contender at this moment. I mean, could be, it depends. But let me tell you what moved the needle. He had 1 year left at 18 million. Pittsburgh is paying him $30 million.
Money counts.
For 5 years. That's his extension. But what I think is interesting too is I looked a little more into that. So Omar Khan, the GM in Pittsburgh, has wanted DK Metcalf for over a year, has been chasing him, and he hasn't been interested in leaving and this and that. And as soon as the trade was requested by DK on Wednesday, Omar Khan picked up the phone to John Snyder and said, "What do you want? We want him." And he got him. So this was not a knee-jerk reaction by Pittsburgh. This was, we have needed offensive help, no matter who's our signal caller. And this is a guy I have been wanting. And the Rooney family gave him the go, and there he went.
Well,
and he
Pittsburgh, they sent a second-round pick to Seattle, and then the two teams flipped picks in the sixth and the seventh rounds.
Mm-hmm.
So not a whole lot of draft capital for DK Metcalf when you compare it to other deals like the A.J. Brown trade, and that seems comparable to me, A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf. Much more draft capital, but Pittsburgh is having to pay the big contract now, and DK Metcalf will have to prove to be worth it. But goodness, he is one of the best receivers in the game, and so it would be intriguing to see, obviously, his productivity in Pittsburgh. This whole deal only works if the Steelers can land a quarterback who can make or take advantage or take the opportunity that is DK Metcalf and Pickens, that duo at wide receiver. They've got to get a quarterback, and I guess that's why they're talking to Aaron Rodgers.
That can keep those receivers happy.
One thing you just said that I found sort of interesting is,
oh, you found something I said interesting?
Well, every now and then when I listen,
that.
Sure.
I see you snoozing over there when I'm talking. I got you.
No, the interesting thing is you just portrayed DK Metcalf. Well, he needed to go to warm weather. He needed this and that, but he was quite happy to go to Pittsburgh when the money was there. Myles Garrett.
I was just going to say.
Myles Garrett. Come on now. He was unhappy.
He was ready to break up, and then he took back his lever.
Because he needed to play on a winner. He needed to be on a team that could give him a championship.
A contender.
This was the most important thing to him, was a chance to win a title. And he knows the Browns are going nowhere because they've made this miserable Deshaun Watson deal. Browns are going nowhere the next 2 to 4 years. They're still going to be handicapped by this Deshaun Watson deal. Yet suddenly, Myles Garrett was paid a lot of money, and he's quite happy to be a Brown.
Yeah, you know what's so weird about it? So he requested his trade, Myles Garrett, when was it? February 3rd, I think. Yes. So that was like over a month ago. And then this week, his team requested a meeting for Myles Garrett with Browns owner Jimmy Hallam. And Jimmy Hallam said, "I'm not meeting with you." And he wanted to meet with him over the trade request, obviously, because nothing was happening. And Andrew Berry, remember last week we sat here and I said, David, Andrew Berry is not trading him. You're like, well, he might have to, which, yeah, he might have to. They didn't waver in Cleveland, which is so funny. And then the owner was like, no, I'm not meeting with you. You go talk to Andrew Berry at GM, which he did. And he referred him to Andrew Berry. And then all of a sudden, here we are. We now have Max Crosby is now second in the NFL as the highest paid non-quarterback, next to Myles Garrett now. And I think it's so funny because here's Cleveland coming off a 3-14 season. They have the number 2 pick in the draft. This guy not only requests a trade, but he requests a meeting with the owner, to which the owner says, no, not having it. And then he turns around and goes, okay, I'll stay. Money talks. That's why agency is not free. It's so not free.
Well, congrats to Myles Garrett. He got what he wanted.
He's a star.
Look, a lot of this is just a business, and he is taking care of his business. It's a really great week.
$40 million a year
for Myles Garrett. Yeah, we've got a couple of other big moves to report and discuss here in the NFL, including Devontae Adams going to the Rams. I
know we were going to get to that one.
And Harold Landry going to the Patriots. That's a good pickup for the Patriots.
We'll
cover
so
those
classic
and more
Mike
when we
Vrabel.
return here on ESPN Radio 97.5 and 92.5.
You're listening to The Boss
And the Gloss.
on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.
Presented by Tony's. Tony's Restaurant, the city's top fine dining experience.
From the Veritex Community Bank Studios, here's David Gow.
And Carla Dawson.
Welcome back, and we are just breaking down a wild day in the NFL. So many deals, so many signings. The Texans, of course, included in all the activity today. We can get back to them later. But I did want to talk to you about Davante Adams going to the Rams, a big-time deal. Rams getting the receiver they wanted, Jets discarding Davante, whom they traded for at the request of Aaron Rodgers. But Rodgers is gone, and now Davante Adams is gone from the Jets. Adams to the Rams. Is there still a lot of good mileage left for Davante? I mean, he's 32. When I think about him, it's been a long time since we saw the elite level of play that Davante Adams brought to that Packers offense years ago.
You know, I think the mistake that Davante Adams has made the past several years is he's followed his friends. You know, when he left Green Bay, he went to go reunite with his college quarterback, Derek Carr. And that would have been great if you didn't have the Daniels regime, Josh McDaniel from Patriots, who wanted Carr out of there. So he didn't. It's not Davante's lack of production. It was what Josh McDaniels was trying to do in Las Vegas to get Derek Carr out. So never really used him well. But then the Raiders had no quarterback for him at all with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. And then he went with his friend again to the Jets with Aaron Rodgers to try and resurrect Aaron Rodgers' career, who was 5-12 last season. So stop following your friends. It doesn't work out that way. You're still talented. So I think the drop-off that we've seen in his production is more of the bad choices he made in following friends that weren't in ideal situations than his actual production. You know, because he's a 6-time Pro Bowler, 3-time first-team All-Pro. And the Rams are going to release Cooper Kupp in the next day or so, and they need to replace him. Can you imagine putting him alongside Puka Nacua for the Rams? And he was released from the Jets March 4th, and it's not. And right now, Adams is costing $38 million against the Jets cap.
Yeah, Jets took a big burden.
Ooh,
that deal that Aaron Rodgers talked him into.
See what I'm saying about Aaron Rodgers?
Bad deal for the Jets. But I just come back to: would you rather have a healthy Cooper Kupp or Davante Adams on your team?
I'd rather have a healthy Cooper Kupp. I totally agree.
Okay, but
right
he's
now
there's all this. They're about to cut Cooper Kupp, get nothing in return. They're going to cut him on Wednesday if nobody offers a trade deal. And maybe someone will do a trade deal like the Texans did with Christian Kirk. He was going to get cut, but in order to ensure that he didn't hit the wide open market, they traded for him. That might happen with Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp has had injury issues, so that's the hiccup with him. But Davante Adams, the hiccup issue is he hasn't been a really good, productive wide receiver in the NFL. He hasn't been elite since he was 29 years old, and he's now 32 years old. That's a real question mark, too. I don't think it's a slam dunk that they're going to be that much better with Davante Adams versus a healthy Cooper Kupp.
Oh, I think talent-wise, I think you're very right about that. But I think here's the difference. Cooper Kupp is expensive for them, and he will be. And Davante Adams is not because of the Jets taking the big $38 million cap hit. Davante Adams' base salary is $8 million this year for the Rams. Now, he has a $12 million signing bonus.
Which will have to be allocated over the 2 years. So the cap hit's going to be the salary of 8 plus 6 of the signing bonus, half of it. So I guess
that's a lot less than what
14 million, which is light in this marketplace.
Sure
Christian Kirk to the Texans, I think, was a 17 million hit. Davante only at about 14 in this year.
So it really does serve the Rams better, to be honest, from their salary cap position. But I think as far as talent, I don't think it's really that a big difference. And, Cooper Kupp has had significant injury history. Davante Adams really has not.
But he's had performance issues. I mean, 3 years is a body of work. I understand bad quarterbacks and all that. I'm just having a hard
more
time.
than bad quarterbacks, because Derek Carr, I wouldn't say is a bad quarterback, but there was bad play calling in Las Vegas. It was pitiful. It was embarrassing, to be honest. And, I'm diehard Raiders. I couldn't find anything good with that offense for the 2 years that he was there. They never called his number. So he was in a bad system for him, a system that had different motives that weren't going to help him. And then he goes to the Jets, with an interim coach in Jeff Ulbrich. I mean, they were a hot mess too. So he's been in, I think this will be very telling in a Sean McVay system. And to see how he does talent wise, because Cooper Kupp, we know his talent and it's incredible. And Devontae Adams doesn't really have injury history. He had some sort of, was it either a thumb or a hamstring where he was sitting out in Las Vegas, but then the next week he got traded to the Jets and was all better. So there we go. So I don't think he's had really injuries to speak of, but I think this will be
how does
interesting
that
to
make
see.
you feel picking up a player who will, as you've just alluded to, perhaps feign an injury? Oh, let's go get him and put lots of money behind him. I just have real question marks about Devontae Adams.
Well, no, that is fair. And really what Devontae Adams is, with all the numbers and looking at how this is laid out, he's on basically a 1-year, $20 million year. And so for an elite wide receiver that we know him to be, hasn't been proven, you're right, in a couple years, that's not breaking the bank. And in Cooper Kupp would be, I think. So anyway, it will remain to be seen. I will be really curious. I like Devontae. He wants to be back in California. I don't know if that's going to rejuvenate him. He's a Northern California guy. This is Southern California, whatever. But Sean McVay, we have our question marks about what kind of a genius is he really? Well, we're about to see.
We've got 2 elite pass rushers who signed with teams. Harold Landry going to the Patriots. And of course, he was from the Titans, so he'll get reunited with Mike Vrabel.
Which will be great. Yeah.
And then Hassan Reddick signing with the Bucks. And those 2 guys are pretty good at their craft. Now, Reddick had a strange season last year.
Yeah,
of course,
he sat out for most of it.
Yeah, I went over to the Jets and all that nonsense, traded from the Eagles. So I don't know how to evaluate Hassan Reddick, but when he was with the Eagles, he was a very productive pass rusher. His statistics were good. He got lots of sacks, and hopefully he can rejuvenate his career with the Bucks. Harold Landry, I think it's a great pickup for the Patriots. They need help almost everywhere on their roster.
And they have a ton of money. They have a ton of cap space.
More cap space than anybody else, and they're starting to spend it. They will upgrade that team. And of course, they can build around a rookie quarterback who's on a rookie salary, Drake May. And I think that's got to be really attractive. When I think about teams that have an opportunity to really improve a ton this year, it's Drake May in a second season. The Patriots spending a lot of capital. I mean, they have
in the trenches.
They've got a lot of money.
In the non-sexy parts.
And then they've got real draft capital too.
Yep.
So the number 4 overall pick, and they don't have to take a quarterback. So if a Shadir Sanders were to fall to number 4, they could trade back for some team desperate to get into that number 4 slot.
Yeah, for sure.
So it'll be fun to watch what they do. Patriots have been off the radar now for several years.
Ooh, man.
Even those last years of Belichick were quite miserable for the Patriots as they worked to battle back under Mike Vrabel. I do think I have a lot more confidence in what Vrabel will do with the Patriots than what Gerard Mayo did last year. I think they've upgraded the coaching position. Although I note that the offensive coordinator for the Patriots is the man you were just talking about, Josh McDaniel, former head coach of the Raiders. He will manage that offense and try to develop Drake May. So that'll be intriguing to watch.
And, the Patriots fans can hope that New England is Josh McDaniel's pacifier. Because it sure isn't anywhere else. I'll tell you that. Not Denver, not Las Vegas. And what he did in Indy was unspeakable. So there we go. Let's hope New England is his place.
All right. When we come back, we're going to be joined by longtime friend of Gal Media, Pat Kennedy. He is a former Division I basketball coach at Florida State and DePaul. And we will ask him, why is Kelvin Sampson not receiving the credit nationally for what he is doing at U of H? It'll be Pat Kennedy up here next on ESPN Radio 97.5 and 92.5.
You're listening to The Boss
and the Gloss.
on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.
Presented by Tony's. Tony's Restaurant, the city's top fine dining experience.
From the Veritex Community Bank Studios, here's David Gow.
And Carla Dawson.
Welcome back, and we are delighted now to be joined by Pat Kennedy, former D1 basketball coach at Florida State and DePaul. Pat, welcome to the show. You're on with David and Carla.
Hey, David and Carla. Great to be with you.
Well, thank you for joining us. We're down here in Houston, Texas, and we are basking in the great season that the Cougars have just had and thinking about what may come as we enter into the March Madness. Love to first talk about Kelvin Sampson. It strikes me he's just done a masterful job this year. From the Houston perspective, we don't think he's getting the kind of credit he deserves. That nationally, there's not a whole lot of attention being paid to Kelvin Sampson and the University of Houston Cougars. Is that fair that he's getting slighted, and why is that?
No, it's certainly not fair. I've known Kelvin for 30 years. He started out coaching in the state of Montana. 2 years ago, had a history of great coaches like a Mike Montgomery, who came out and coached at Stanford and coached in the pros. Kelvin did an unbelievable job at Washington State. That's really where he made his name. And for us in the business, Washington State is a really, really tough place to win at. George Raveling, who coached there for a while, said that Pullman, Washington is not the end of the earth, but you can see it from there.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, and then of course Kelvin then advanced his career. He had that situation at Indiana that didn't help too much with some of the NCAA violations, but now we know that stuff was somewhat meaningless in today's world. But he is probably reminds me a lot of Jerry Tarkanian. When Tark coached at Vegas, people underestimated how great his defense was. Kelvin does an unbelievable job with the defense. And I think the years that he spent with the Rockets in the NBA really increased his offensive coaching ability. So right now, I mean, there's a number of really outstanding coaches in this country in college basketball, led by, the Bill Selfs of the world and obviously the Tom Izzos. But now these younger guys are all starting to move up. Kelvin is more in the Izzo Self category. But clearly, I think whether he does or doesn't win a national championship, what he's done here these last, 7 or 8 years at Houston has been nothing short of remarkable.
You're so right, Pat. And he seems to really get so much out of his players on any given night. It's really impressive. And we love what he's doing here. So you have won almost 500 games in your own career, Pat, which is so impressive. And you talked about these great coaches, mentioning Bill Self and some of the traditional powers like the Kansases, the UNCs, the UConns. They've struggled this year in stretches. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting. It's very hard to certainly maintain a certain level of consistency. Dean Smith was remarkable, because of how well they played year in and year out. Bobby Knight, remarkable. John Thompson at Georgetown, remarkable. But I will say this: like, if you take a look at Bill Self's career, look at all of the Big 12 championships he did win, and how many years he consistently won them. But what's really changed the whole structure of college basketball is this NIL and the ability for youngsters to decide where they want to go play based on the amount of money they get. So our recruitment was totally different. We talked about education, life after basketball, developing as a young man. So you get a guy as a freshman, and your greatest day was when he graduated as a senior. Well, that's not the case anymore right now. It's just bring him in, pay him to play, learn how to coach a team, which is going to be a new team every year, and then take it from there. And that's why I've told people I think the Southeastern Conference is going to run away with college basketball, because all of those schools that are in that conference will pay the money they need to pay. I mean, you look at the ACC, they got 18 teams. And the Notre Dames of the world, even North Carolina, unless they change their way, they're just not going to sit there and try to outbid somebody for a young man. So the whole environment has really changed. I was at a press conference today here at Florida State where they just named their new head coach, Luke Laux. He's never coached a game in his life. A wonderful young coach. He was at Golden State with Steve Kerr. He's currently with the Sacramento Kings, and he's going to replace Leonard Hamilton. He's never coached one basketball game in his life, but he was developing rosters. He was developing individual players, helping guys get to the next level. So it's all about developing players so they can become better for the NBA, and it's all about buying kids. And I hate to use the word buying kids, just paying kids accordingly. And everyone's going to take a different stance on that.
And Pat, do you think there's an extra added onus on coaching where you work hard to recruit these kids, as you know very well, being a former head coach at Florida State and DePaul, but now you would have to re-recruit your players every year?
Oh, that's such a great point. In fact, Luke was talking about that at his press conference today, that one of the big things he's going to concentrate on is recruit. Florida State's got 3 or 4 really outstanding young men. They have the best big junior college kid from a year ago who's had a terrific year for them. He's got to go in there right now and recruit those guys before he recruits anybody else.
Oh, my gosh.
Because how do you go on one kid's home when another kid is leaving your program? How do you explain that to a family and the high school coaches when they ask you about, where's your program at? So it's an incredibly important thing that you have to learn how to do. I think all these models are just being massaged right now, and guys are going to figure out, okay, how do I recruit them? You want to waste time trying to wine and dine the kid and convince him? Or do you just come up with the extra $50,000 and put it on the table and let the kid and his family make a decision? Those are going to be some tough decisions for certain coaches. That's why Coach Bennett is out, Coach Krzyzewski,
Absolutely.
Jim Boeheim, Jay Wright. I mean, Jay Wright's a perfect example. The guy won 2 or 3 national championships at Villanova, and all of a sudden he leaves. Jay was not going to deal with that crap, and so that's what's happening.
I mean, Nick Saban on the football side, same thing. It's just
absolutely,
it's just that's a hard job in college sports. It's year round, and the recruiting is a huge part of it. And when you have to continually re-recruit, it's just brutal. I hear you.
Yeah, very, very difficult.
We are talking with Pat Kennedy, of course, a former D1 basketball coach in the NCAA. Okay, let's talk about March Madness. Let's look ahead a bit. What's the ceiling? How far do you think the Cougars can get?
Oh, I think they're a Final Four team. I mean, I've seen them a number of times. And I think about how a team reflects their coach. I mean, Kelvin Sampson is a great guy off the floor if you all spent time with him. Funny, warm, great family man, great husband. He's a great guy. On the court, he's a different breed of cat. And his kids reflect his personality. They're tough as nails. I love to watch him on out-of-bounds plays. I mean, trying to run an out-of-bounds play against Houston is just unbelievable because they guard you so hard. And then when the game is on the line, they look so confident. It's like every time they need to make a play or hit a jumper or hit a drive to the basket in the last 2 minutes of the game, to me, when I see that, it reflects Kelvin tremendously, tremendous amount of confidence. A lot like the UConn team when Jim Calhoun was there. I think they can get to the Final Four. I think they could win it. But the difference, I think, with this tournament, there's probably about 12 teams that are all equal.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think about 12 teams could cut down the nets.
Oh, Texas Tech! Look at that. I mean, in your own state. I mean, Texas Tech is a team after losing their coach and one of their best players and still being able to go on the road and beat Houston was an incredible accomplishment. But yeah, there's definitely 12 teams, of which probably 4 or 5. My favorite team, not because I'm living in Florida now, but I just think the Gators are, when they're playing well, they're, if not good, they're better than anybody else. And Duke is playing the best they've played all year. I think that you've got, their guys all coming together and gelling at the right time. It's going to be a great Final Four, but again, I think state of Texas has got some pretty good teams going in there.
We are talking with Coach Pat Kennedy. Want to ask you about Player of the Year, who deserves to win it, or is it Cooper Flagg, the presumptive winner this year? What makes him so special?
Well, Cooper Flagg can do everything on the court. To me, he reminds me of a more athletic Larry Bird. I mean, I know everyone's building him up, and it's so easy to build up a player who's obviously a great player. But if you study the game and you understand the game, this youngster can pass the ball. He can shoot the ball. He can attack the rim. He plays defense. He gets loose balls. He's a great rebounder, incredibly tough, and very intense. And that's what Larry Bird was. Larry Bird could do everything extremely well. So if you're picking the best player in college basketball, it's clearly Cooper Flagg. I don't think there's any question about that in my mind. Now, there's some other guys that have had really good seasons, and I'm sure they're going to be talked about. The youngster Broomy at
Auburn.
Yeah, he's had a great year. But to me, I would think Cooper Flagg will get most of the votes if the voters understand the game of basketball.
Pat, you talked about Florida, and they're one of 4 teams that rank in the top 10 in both offense and defense efficiency per KenPom. But third-year head coach Todd Golden is still looking for his first NCAA tournament win. Is he going to get it this year, and how far do you see them going?
Yeah, isn't that a strange thing?
Yes, it's so weird.
When you have all those little funny things when he gets to the NCAA tournament, you see how well a guy's done, and then he gets upset in the first round. But Coach has really learned his craft out there at the University of San Francisco, where he had great teams. In fact, Coach Laux here at Florida State was talking about how much time Coach Golden spent with Steve Kerr when he was in the Bay Area. This team can go all the way. So they're going to be a very, very tough out. I look at teams because I've had eight NCAA tournament teams in my day. We went to the Sweet 16 and Final 8, so I know what it takes to certainly get through the tournament. 2 of the toughest teams it is going to be to take out is going to be St. John's and Houston.
Oh, St. John's.
And then 2 teams that clearly can get to the championship game, in my opinion. That's Florida and Michigan State. So, again, I just think there's so many interesting teams. And I would think Todd will get his first NCAA win this year.
Okay, you heard it here. Coach Kennedy telling us the scoop.
Hey, Coach, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate the time.
My pleasure, guys. And all the best to Kelvin Sampson and his whole team. He has really earned it.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Go Cougs.
All right, we will be right back, and we're going to break down one more round of big trades in the NFL and also talk about the NBA, what happened this week of real note. That up next year on ESPN Radio 97.5 and 92.5.
You're listening to The Boss
and the Gloss.
on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.
Presented by Tony's. Tony's Restaurant, the city's top fine dining experience.
From the Veritex Community Bank Studios, here's David Gow.
And Carla Dawson.
Well, it was great to talk to the coach, Pat Kennedy.
Oh my gosh. He has almost 500 wins in his career. Do you know how hard that is?
I mean, we're going to have to get him back during the March Madness chaos because it's such an electric time. And you were just saying in the break, it's one of your favorite seasons in sports. So much chaos, so many unpredictable outcomes. I look forward to seeing your brackets all filled out and then watching them all blow up because that's the nature of March Madness.
Yes.
Nobody gets it right.
And it's the nature of my brackets too. It's like the more I know, the worse I get.
Oh, you do darn well.
I did win a pair of shoes one year. Like, well, won money to buy a
You
good pair of
are
shoes.
excellent.
But
at your
other than
bracket.
that, no,
listen, for
not
those who want it, we should put your bracket out on a website somewhere because people would take it home and use it for the office pool bet.
for target practice.
They'll all get rich off of
Yeah.
Carla's wisdom.
They might get some good shoes out of it. You
get
never
some
know.
shoes.
That's all right. Let's talk about the important
Carla, you
stuff.
don't need any new shoes. You
I-
got a great collection
I
of shoes.
don't need new shoes. That's exactly right.
But that doesn't mean you don't want a new
That's
pair of shoes.
exactly
Need
right.
versus want are two different things.
Yeah,
I
and for
suppose.
women, shoes always fit, David. No matter what we've eaten or not eaten, shoes are always the go-to.
There it is.
You don't
heard it here.
grow out of them.
There's
That's
a
good
lot of
news.
wisdom from the gloss here. And so men,
I'm sure that's exactly what men on sports
buy
radio want to hear.
shoes for your woman.
Yeah, and you are very good about that. You take care of your bride, your daughter-in-laws.
I do what
you
I
know how to
can.
do it. You know
Well,
how
the
to do
reason
it,
I like to
boss.
buy shoes is it is just a size. I don't have to worry about getting the sizing wrong. If you buy a pair of jeans for
or
a woman,
offending someone.
I would never buy
Oh,
a pair
yeah.
of jeans for a
Oh,
woman. It's
no.
just too much going on there.
Because if you buy it too big, you'll be sleeping on the couch. If you get it too small and they don't fit into it, you're sleeping on the couch because then they feel terrible.
Oh,
So it's a no-win. Stick to shoes because I've seen what you do and you do a great job.
thank you.
All righty.
Good advice there. Okay. Big week in the NBA in this sense. There was a really fun game. It was the Lakers and the Celtics.
Oh my gosh, you have to be beside yourself. with your
Long-standing
Celtics.
rivalry, marquee matchup, Lakers, Celtics. Nothing's quite like that. Celtics, the defending champ. Lakers now the team on the rise with the addition of Luka. And it was a great, great battle back and forth until, unfortunately, LeBron strained his groin and had to leave the game sort of midway through the fourth quarter. But a good game. And then now the mystery is, how long will LeBron be out? And what does it mean for the Lakers as they position for the final playoffs here? Will it affect their seed? They don't have a lot of space, a lot of cushion here, and Luka's going to have to carry that team.
Well, I think so. Currently, right now, the Lakers are sitting at third in the Western Conference, which is unbelievable because before the Luka trade, they were closer to the play-in, and now they're 2 from the top seeds. So there we go. I think every time I turn on the radio, the TV, or whatever today, it's LeBron's LeGroin. That's all we're talking about.
Say that again. LeBron's LeGroin? That's actually pretty good.
I named it
All right.
because I just wanted to. Because we were talking about it all day long.
Trademark Carla Dawson, the gloss. Keep going.
Exactly.
Yes.
R with a circle around it. Or
Yes.
TM, whatever it is. TM with a circle.
LeBron LeGroin. Okay, he's got a groin issue.
He's got a groin issue. He's not concerned. 1 to 2 weeks, probably. He's had this before where he missed, I think, 18 days. This is just a tweak of that strain. You know what this is? This is great for the Lakers in one way. In one way, it's not. Because LeBron's getting rest. It's 1 month into the playoffs. He's 40 years old. He plays major minutes. So I see a positive in the fact that he's getting rest at a really great time when he knows he needs to be healthy and ready to go for the playoffs. And this gives JJ Redick a chance to play a little bit with these lineups and see what to do with Luka. And you got Luka and LeBron sharing the rock. That's a little tricky. Well, now Luka's going to step up and be the man. And this allows Redick, some flexibility to see what they can do there. Also, here's the tricky part, though. That's the good news for LeBron's injury and with timing and everything else, and he will be just fine. He's tough as nails. Mm-hmm. The Lakers are entering a brutal stretch in their schedule right now. So they have 6 games in 8 days coming up.
Well, that's tough.
Including 2 apiece versus Denver and Milwaukee.
That's really tough.
So I think that's that's pretty rough. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that's going to be tricky. But you know what? Luka's revived. I mean, I think we're seeing a new Luka.
Luka has the ability to really carry a team offensively. And he's shown that. He did it for the Mavericks. I think he can do it for a few games, though. I mean, you just can't do that night in and night out, particularly when Luka's renowned for not being in great shape. To do back-to-back-to-back games like that and have to carry the team offensively, it's going to be tough. And I think some teams will do what the Celtics love to do, is to have Jaylen Brown really work. You put your best defender on Luka and you get in his face and you make him work offensively.
Yeah,
He has
you
to
wear
work
him out
so hard. You wear him out a bit, and then you attack him when he's on defense. And that's a good formula for a player whom that sounds like a negative, but I hold him in a ton of respect because he is an elite, extraordinary talent on the court.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think the Lakers are going to be just fine.
Okay, in the NBA right now, there is sort of a raging debate about it. We're getting near the end of the regular season. Who should be the MVP? Have you evolved in your thinking? Who do you think now, as we get to the end here, deserves or warrants the MVP title this year?
You know what? I love me some SGA. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from the Thunder.
Yeah.
What he is doing night in and night out is so exciting. To be honest, I have a little Nikola fatigue. I'm over it. And they were head-to-head the other night.
He was pretty exceptional this week.
Yes, he was.
You saw it, a triple-double.
Yeah, 30-20-20.
30-20-20.
No one's ever done that.
Amazing.
So that is incredible.
And it's a good time to do it as we're all thinking about our MVP votes. But you're right. I mean,
but they in the head-to-head matchup with the Thunder, they did not come out on top. So there's that. But he was the first player to post 30-20-20 line, which was actually 31-22 and 21 versus Phoenix on Friday night. I mean, that's just insane.
It's insane.
But then listen to this. I mean, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has had 3 consecutive 40 or more point games. 3 consecutive.
Equally impressive.
Wow.
I mean, they are really both entitled or deserving this year.
Yes.
No question. SGA and the Joker, those two guys have had an extraordinary season, and they may well meet in the Western Conference Finals,
yes,
depending on how the seeding matches up. But those two teams
who don't let LeBron's LeGroin hear you. He will not like that.
I would make a bet on OKC and Denver ahead of the Lakers. I think it's different in the regular season versus the playoffs. I think in the playoffs, well, we all know the defensive intensity is much more significant. Everybody really raises their game in the playoffs. And I think the Lakers will find themselves a little short-handed. They've got the 2 elite guys, but when you look at the team depth that, say, OKC has.
And the size that they gave to Dallas.
And the size and the way they can throw their bodies, a lot of bodies, at LeBron and Luka and play very physical basketball, which is playoff basketball. I have a hard time thinking that someone over 40 years old, as good as LeBron is, and Luka, who can get worn down, would be able to get past a team as deep as OKC.
You know, the only negative that I can see against OKC, I think that roster is unbelievable. I love watching them. They make it look really easy, and SGA's season is MVP worthy, as we're talking about. It's the lack of experience once you get into the playoffs. The Lakers have won, even though it was in the bubble.
Yep.
They have won. Denver has won. And OKC, I think it's hard. Experience matters as the pyramid gets closer to the top.
Yep.
Experience really shines out. Like prime example was the Golden State Warriors team in 2022 versus the Boston Celtics. Boston Celtics, clearly the younger, more talented team.
Yep.
But the Warriors, 3-time champions, 6-time finals team, came in and just flipped a series. So, that's the only knock I would say against OKC is experience. I think talent-wise, they're ready, and I think they can make a deep, deep run.
It does seem like the rising team, the young, talented team, always has 1 or 2 seasons where they get close before they finally break through.
Yep.
And that might be OKC this year.
And it was Boston last year.
Boston before,
I mean,
of course,
they did it.
And you can go back. I mean, I can remember even back in the Celtics early days when they were trying to burst through in the 70s with Bird. They had to get through the 76ers, and it was a challenge. And then, of course, the Pistons always struggled with Isaiah Thomas to get by the Celtics, and they finally did. And then the Pistons, the bad boys, went on to win at least 2 championships. But it was hard to burst through, and that may be where OKC is, particularly when you look at the Lakers and the Nuggets, who have been there before and won a championship.
Yeah, been there, done that. You want to hear a cool little nugget?
Yes.
So Steph Curry is going to take a front office role. He is going to be the assistant GM of basketball for Davidson College, his alma mater. Pretty cool.
How great.
I know. I was kind of surprised. Saw it today.
I'm surprised they didn't ask you for that opportunity.
Me too.
They need to find the gloss, but we've got the gloss right here, and you've been listening to the gloss. We've had Abigail behind the glass. Thank you, Abigail. You've been listening to the Boston Gloss here on ESPN Radio 97.5 and 92.5.